So yeah, quite heavy topics, but dealt with in a very light way in this one. But yeah, so let's go. I'm aware. Oh, here's just an outline for how we're going to structure this talk. So we've just got strippers in popular media generally, and then specifically horror. There are a lot of strippers in a lot of films, usually as very minor characters. In horror, they tend to get more agency, and it's more exploring why that is. And then power dynamics in terms of the space in which people strip, so strip clubs and how they function in reality, but also how that translates to film. And if that's particularly accurate or reflects anything horror-wise. And then power dynamics is fairly self-explanatory. A lot of the focus on this is going to be based in film examples, with also a few references to actual real theory about strip clubs born from ethnographies and a lot of research in sociology and things like that. So why strippers and horror? I'm aware that this topic seems a bit out of nowhere. I'm aware that it's not really a common pair, but the easiest way to address this is starting strippers in literal just any media. I'm using films just as an easy example because I think these are the most easily accessible ones. A lot of the media representation of strippers falls into one of three main camps, which are a dangerous glamorization of the job, punching down comedy, in which the stripper is the joke, or they're being used as essentially trauma porn, a phrase which in this instance is very using traumatic experiences of strippers for the entertainment of others, which is a thing that happens in reality as well. It's not particularly far from the truth. Genre-wise, there are more common examples of each types of representation of strippers. So we've got Jennifer Aniston and We Are the Millers, which is our top right picture, which is a joke. She's a joke in a rom-com where she's a washed-up stripper who, washed up in inverted commas, who needs the money and, spoiler alert for this film, agrees to smuggle drugs over the border because she is that washed up and that not profitable. Natalie Portman in Closer, which is our bottom left, is used in a romantic drama, and it's used essentially as a figure to show the deceit of Natalie Portman's real character. It's nothing to do with her being a stripper. The stripper is just a costume for her actual character in this. And the entire cast of Hustlers, I have a lot of hatred for the film Hustlers because of how much it glamorizes the industry. It barely shows any negatives of stripping, in which there are very real negatives. Labor rights are awful. It's a very patriarchal sphere to exist in. It's a very hard job, and Hustlers doesn't really show that. The representation and the reputation of Hustlers that has been given to it is I call them girl boss good for her films. A lot of films that go into this are things like Midsummer, Promising Young Woman. Those two shouldn't be in the category, but they are within the good for her revenge female revenge flicks. But the thing is with Hustlers, it's based on a case of real strippers drugging customers. A lot of people forget that this is not about everyday stripping. This is about a real crime that took place, about a group of women consistently drugging their customers and stealing their money. It's not really relevant to actual stripping, despite what people have taken it to be. I have issues with all the three of those approaches to representation of strippers, but the glamorization of sex work is mainly my issue, because sex work is hard work. In reality now, since Hustlers, a lot of people have entered sex work thinking it's a lot easier than it is, because they're going into it sold this fantasy and sold a lie. It's not just Hustlers, so I'm not blaming Hustlers entirely, but it's part of the problem. A lot of media, whether it's social media or actual films and books, have made it seem like you can get millions of pounds a night for doing hardly anything, but that's not the reality. One of the reasons this is very frustrating is because there are clearly no sex workers involved in the production of any of these films, which exacerbates this problem. Generally, sex workers exist on the fringe of society, and this others them. This is how it links to horror for me. So I could tell this really elaborate story about how I found these films on my own after I thought really hard about strippers and horror. But the reality in it is it was very late one night and I was scrolling through Amazon and trying to find something to watch. And I was on towards the end of everything they had, you know, when you get the really, really bad films that no one really watches. These are at the bottom, the films so like Big Tit Zombie and Zombie Stripper were at the bottom. The fact that I had to find them through luck shows how disrespected, one, horror can be as a genre, but two, strippers are as a figure. However, I think that strippers have a lot more freedom within the horror sphere, and they're more accurately represented in this sphere than any other genre of film because of the reputation horror has. Horror is consistently undersold and not given much cultural capital. So you have horror films just not being recognised in award ceremonies when they should be. Horror never really been seen as a true genre. A lot of things of, oh, it's just a jump scare, it's a scary film, when there are some very, very phenomenal horror films out there that deserve much more attention. Horror is a fringe genre of film, and sex workers are a fringe group in society. So yeah, these are the two films I chose. Basically, Zombie Strippers was a choice because, one, the tagline of that film is phenomenal. The posters, I've chosen these because you can see how just cringy and how much they lean into the campiness of the topic. But Zombie Strippers is based on, well, the director claims it's very loosely based on Rhinoceros, the play, in which people start pretending to rhinoceri, and then it becomes a trend. It's meant to be a critique of capitalism, Zombie Strippers. It's a pseudo-intellectual film. Big Tit Zombie is also within this camp of it is meant to be attacking Western culture. It's a Japanese film, and it's essentially making fun of American views of mangas. Big Tit Zombie was originally a manga itself. I cannot remember the name of it. I will have a search of it for the questions later if anyone's interested. I haven't read the manga, I've only seen the film though. So in terms of why zombies, because there are lots of films about vampires and strippers, I feel like that's a very, very easy link to make, given the idea that female vampires have this figure of sexuality. With zombies, the primary image that came out to me in my research is the hand reaching out the grave. It's really commonly used. So we've got things like Left 4 Dead and Walking Dead, any media with the word dead in it to be realistic. But it's used to reach out to attempt to attack the victims or to crawl out of a grave. When you apply this to sex workers in the horror genre, it becomes a representation of the violation that touch is for strippers in both films. In both films, touch violates the stripper if they're human at that time. When the stripper is a zombie, the reversal of violating touch brings new life to their undead forms. The social contract inherent in buying a lap dance works with minimal or no touching occurring, dependent on geographic location, of course. Every country has different rules within strip clubs. I'm based in the UK, so clubs in England are no touch. You cannot touch a stripper. In Japan, strip clubs function a bit differently to how they're commonly thought to. So they give stage shows on stage, but they don't necessarily give lap dances. In traditional Japanese clubs, there is also a trend in Japanese clubs in Japan of American style strip clubs in which touching is allowed, but that's an exception to this. American strip clubs allow touching to an extent, depending on which state you are in, but either way, it's consensual. That is the key point I'm making here. So because the social contract of a lap dance occurs with no or hardly any touching occurring, Jill Dolan's theory on fantasized male power is really, really important in this. Dolan writes, albeit assuming that all strippers to be female, which isn't necessarily true, that the stripper is essentially inaccessible. She is positioned as an elusive object of desire, guarded by the representational frame, who can be seen, sometimes touched, but not had within terms of the exchange. In this context, she is in some ways the sadist in a relationship built on male masochism, yet male spectators can certainly fantasize themselves in positions of power, which would reverse this relationship. The framework for the exchange is economic. Spectators pay to see the image of the stripper as commodity. They buy control over the gaze. Whether they position themselves as sadists or masochists, their power lies in controlling the illusion that the stripper is performing for them. What this means in terms of Dolan's understanding of the semi-sadomasochistic relationship for strip club customers is that these figures in the films and in reality, regardless of genre, are the ones in power within this. Of course, within the framing of the film, this can be changed. Within Big Tit Zombie and Zombie Strippers, the protagonists and the people we follow for the majority of the film are the strippers. However, whether they are touching the customers or the customers are touching them, that is where the horror is born. It is the destruction of the perceived control over the gaze, which makes things horrifying. An important thing to talk about in this is the power dynamic of it and a concept called the whorearchy. So the whorearchy is a system of discrimination against sex workers reliant on the level of contact they have with their clients. Monique Duggan made this very, very useful infographic about it, but essentially the more contact and more physical touch you have with the customer, the lower down the hierarchy you are. The less respected you are in society, and oftentimes other sex workers will shame people lower down on the hierarchy. The hierarchy is a term coined by sex workers for sex workers. I don't think it is intentionally included in any of these films, but with the way these films are made and cast, it is inherent. So within both Zombie Strippers and Big Tit Zombie, there are famous porn stars in the cast. So Zombie Strippers, we have Jenna Jameson, who I believe is now retired, but at the time, huge name in porn. And in Big Tit Zombie, we have Sola Aoi and Risa Kasumi. I'm not sure if either of those are still within the pornographic realm, but Sola Aoi is a very famous name within that in Japanese porn. In these films, these are the only people who really get naked, which seems counterproductive for a stripper film, right? A lot of the straight actors, the actors who are not sex workers before entering this production and won't be sex workers after leaving it, are often censored, or their dignity is protected by clever camera cuts, new angles, and implied stripping. The only time we really see full frontal nudity is with these three people. In Zombie Strippers, there is also the other main girl who is a foil to Jenna Jameson, who does get naked, but she is the only exception in these films, who is a straight actor. The civilian, so non-sex worker actors, are allowed to be relatively clothed on camera, and they're allowed a mainstream acting career to exist. A lot of these people went on to star in other horror films and different things onwards. These three figures didn't really go on to star in anything new in films that were not pornographic. They didn't really leave the porn realm. The adult stars, the porn stars, are not given the chance for dignity due to the pre-existing stigma and intimacy with clients who consume adult entertainment. Regardless of who they would be cast as in the film, they're still going to be the ones who are naked, and they're still going to be the actual strippers. The others are performing the labor, but miming it in a way. There is no true actual stripping. So, scary sex workers and stripping spaces. A little plot summary of both of these films, if I could do it in the simplest way possible. There's different approaches to how the zombie attack occurs, and who the zombie is in both these films. So in Big Tit Zombies, the strippers are attacked by zombies. They do, however, somewhat bring this on themselves, because next to Big Tit Zombie has a wild plot. I'm very sorry. The strip club is running out of money. They visit and travel to a spa, and where they set up like essentially a pop-up strip club within this spa. By their dressing room, there is a basement. They go into the basement. They read essentially the Necronomicon. In fact, it's called the Necronomicon in this, and it brings about a horde of undead men and also undead sushi. It's a wild scene. I recommend it. But the important thing is, within this, the zombified men are the ones who have the control over touch in this. They come to attack the women. In Zombie Strippers, it occurs as an infection narrative in which it's a political commentary. There is an infected soldier who has been infected. I cannot remember the name of the virus, but it's a virus essentially created by the government, it turns out, which just essentially zombifies people. He has this and goes to a strip club and then attacks a stripper. However, rather than the stripper feeling violated and continuously feeling violated like they did in Big Tit Zombie, Kat, who is played by Jenna Jameson, goes on to then essentially strip whilst she is a zombie. It makes a lot of money because of the it's just a gimmick essentially. It's new, it's novel, and within this she turns other strippers into zombies if they ask. She takes customers back into lap dances and kills them and eats them, and it makes the club money. So in both these plots, it's very stripper centric, and they both punish men who overstep boundaries, but in different ways. So in terms of invasion, Big Tit Zombie exists on the invasion of a spa by a strip club. From my understanding, Japanese strip club culture is based on the entertainers having an hourly wage as well as accepting tips. Unlike the US and the UK, if you weren't aware, strippers do not get an hourly wage. They have to pay to work, and then they make a cut of whatever they actually earn through dancing. Big Tit Zombie, this exploitation and control of the touch happens while the strippers are bribed to do increasingly dehumanizing acts for the entertainment of the spa goers. This starts before they're zombified and is only exemplified after the men become zombies. In Zombie Strippers, the strippers actively seek out customers who cross the boundaries and kill them first. The initial bite is from a stage invasion, which is an unwelcome act, but every single private dance leads to death onwards from that point in the film. It is a case of them getting the customers first. So Kim Price Glynn wrote a really interesting and fully formed study on a strip club in which she went to work at as a bartender or a waitress, and she interviewed strippers, and this is all based in America, so please bear this in mind. This necessarily won't apply to Big Tit Zombie. The strip club was called the Lion's Den, but basically the stripper is seen as a threat in both these contexts because of performed masculinities within a strip club. So to condense what she is saying here, she proposes that masculinities within strip clubs and how they are enacted can be separated into essentially female validation, male bonding, and exploitation and dehumanization. A lot of the female validation ones are based on having the ability of men to reject women and go up to women in an encounter which wouldn't necessarily happen in the exterior world to the strip club. Is this idea of being wanted. Male bonding is easiest example as stag do's or lads' nights out to go to strip clubs with a huge group of them in which they're going to bond whilst there are strippers around them. And exploitation and dehumanization is pretty prevalent in the name. It's sort of pretty self-explanatory. This is the most important one for horror. Horror occurs for the strippers when the third type occurs. Horror occurs for men when a combination of the first and second type occur. So, this is most seen in the private dance rooms. So, Hannah writes, Judith Lynn Hannah, who is a dance theorist, writes on implied intimacy and how this helps this dynamic work. So, physical proximity and social interaction conveys a message and expectation about the level of intimacy appropriate or desired. In a regular strip club, this is true. The appeal of a lap dance and the appeal of a private room is female validation. And it's, in some very rare occasions, the option to exploit or dehumanize a woman whilst they are in there. In the framing of this shot, however, from zombie strippers, the implied power dynamic that male fantasies assume is flipped. Kat is lit from above and remains in the spotlight through this whole scene. We only see the male customer's back and he's just a body. He's just a piece of meat, to use a very common swerve term about sex workers. He's very frozen this entire shot. He doesn't really move. The stripper has ultimate control over him in this instance. The sadomasochistic relationship is really explored in this idea of a private dance. The darkness of this shot is interrupted by red and green walls, in color combination, which is reminiscent of abject substances like blood and bile. This is the first time that a stripper is going to kill and eat a customer. Kat's covered in blood from the attack she had on stage, and the customer's wearing a green shirt. They reflect the walls around them. This is inevitable that it's going to happen. Once a stripper has been pushed too far, the horror for male customers comes from enacting revenge in a similar manner. Zombiedom has liberated sex workers in this to explicitly inhabit the power inherent in stripping. They are using and twisting the female validation that people crave in a lap dance to essentially fight unwanted touch. Here's just an example from zombie strippers about essentially male bonding. Big Tit Zombie pretty much uses the exploitation type of Price Glynn's theory. A minor case of male bonding. Zombie strippers focuses on male bonding and a bit of female validation. The customers are never really given names. There's just a horde of men who are acting in very bachelor stag do fashions. They're very they interact with each other, other strippers. In zombie strippers, minor characters such as Jessie's ex-boyfriend. Jessie is a good Christian girl who has turned to stripping in order to pay bills for her grandmother. Her ex-boyfriend is type 1. He wants the female validation. He wants Jessie to himself. His entire plot point is about preventing her from stripping. He wants the validation of having her for just himself. The club owner, Ian Esco, who is played by the wonderful Robert Englund, is type 3. He functions because he likes to exploit the women around him. One example is whilst another dancer, Lilith, is on stage, he announces a new concept called a face dance. Non-consensually, it's not run by the strippers, and it is clear in her reaction to this that she is not okay with this occurring. She is angry, she's visibly angry, and he announces it as she is dancing and essentially forces her economically to do so. However, the deaths of customers are much easier to handle because the men are a horde. They're easily picked apart in the sake of banter. A lot of the times within the death scene I just showed you a screenshot of. Spoiler, he dies because Kat bites off his penis because he thinks he can get extras in a strip club. His cries of pain are awarded by the men who are outside, his friends, by cheering because they think he has succeeded in getting a stripper to go past her boundaries. The majority of deaths are cheered on by men from outside the dance room because they think their friend has succeeded in pushing boundaries so far and exploiting touch. Big Tit Zombie uses public spaces for type 3 masculinity rather than a private space. The character below is called Ginkgo. She is one of the main strippers who lost a bet and is become a sexualized object. She essentially functions as a human sushi board within this scene. This is shot in the least erotic way this scene could be shot, contrary to what you'd assume. There's a heavy emphasis on her discomfort. There are a lot of close shots of her face in pain as the men threaten to cause actual pain for entertainment. The threat of putting grated wasabi on her genitals, and there's also, just before this, they pour sake on her, which are very painful substances. For their entertainment, it's clear that she is a commodity in this. They are using her body and exploiting it. It's not erotic. It's not an act to be expected in a strip club at all, to be quite frank. But because Big Tit Zombie functions outside of the concrete building of a strip club, this can occur. So Kaylee Murphy writes on the inclusion of gore, which is mirrored later in the scene. It's very important now that we have this visual of Ginkgo as a human, as a sushi board. So Murphy writes, like the Western zombie film, the Japanese zombie film does not shy away from showing people ripped to pieces when they lose a fight with a zombie. Here is someone who has lost a fight with the zombie men. So this is not Ginkgo. This is another very, very minor female character. The only real appearance we have with this woman, who does not have a name to my understanding, to my knowledge, is when the strippers enter the spa. They go through the front door and she shoos them away and says only sex workers must use the rear entrance. This leads the group of strippers to then argue that they're not sex workers, which is a problematic statement itself to go through. But sex workers often commonly thought to just mean full service sex workers when it's an umbrella term. We can overlook that. Her only interaction is this. We never really see her again. She's not really in the back of any shots. We literally just see her reject strippers as another woman. However, this woman is then discriminated against and degraded and becomes the consumable object, much like she did to the strippers earlier in the film. Rather than a sushi platter, her innards are splayed across her in a very similar manner. It's shot in a very similar way. It's slightly more above, but otherwise it is very intimately shot in a very non-erotic manner. The setup for this gore implies a negative consumption of Ginkgo by the men around her who toy with her repeatedly. When you go back to the sushi board, it's clear these are the same thing. Rather than having the men become exploitative when they become zombies and then eat the innards of the females around them, it's clear that this is their intention all along within this. They are bonding as men based on female exploitation. Skull writes that zombies lose their identity, but it's clear that these men are simply repeating their earlier actions in a more intense manner. So these men were either zombie-like figures the entire time, or the exploitation on its own is horrific enough. This brings us to the power dynamics in the films. This upcoming scene is one of my favorite scenes. I don't have a clip of it, but I would definitely recommend it. It's a conversation between Jessie, the good church Christian girl, and her boyfriend, well, ex-boyfriend, Davis. This is the one scene that makes zombie strippers such a positive representation and accurate representation of strippers. It's clear that zombies in Big Tit Zombie, once zombified, are just an elevated version and continuation of who they are before. The power dynamic relied on male bonding performance by the exploitation of women, like I said. There's a little more to say on the masochism in the relationship between customer and performer, because the film does not seem to pay for these women, except for when the women are goaded into games. The game that led to Ginkgo being a human sushi board is essentially they were bored with the stripping and challenged two women to wrestle each other, and the winner won money. Loser was punished whichever way. They were never told the stakes before they entered this. In this, it does not appear to be male masochism, but female masochism, likely due to the all-male production team of Big Tit Zombie. I'd also like to say the director was a previously very well-established pink film director, which is essentially Japanese softcore porn. So this focus on the inaccurate portrayal of the relationship of sadism and masochism between performer and customer makes a lot of sense. I can see why this occurred in this film. The only instance in any of the films I've studied about this, of the recognition of masochism and sadism within the relationship and the economic relationship between performer and customer, is within this interaction. So here is essentially a script of what happens. So I personally think this is, a lot of times this is played for laughs, but it is a very, very upsetting and realistic thing. Jessie argues that there's more to life than essentially forced into the Madonna complex for him, because she has a lot going on. She has things that she has to actually take care of. She has an actual financial need to do this. And his want for her to stay pure is based on control. It's based on sadism. He wants her to suffer because he wants to control her. But Davis's change at the end of, oh, if you have to strip, I'm going to watch, summarizes the extent of male sadist power fantasies. He wants the control of a woman without paying for her. He wants to see Jessie as an object of innocence. Jessie cannot feasibly continue to volunteer control of herself to be an image for a man. So her choice to be a stripper just benefits her more. There is no positive that outweighs the positives financially of stripping in this instance. One point I did forget to mention earlier is within this film, stripping is illegal. It is an underground strip club, so there is the risk of arrest and punishment. But the more direct and more concrete need of caring for her grandmother comes first. The empowerment that disturbs Davis, and by extension the wider public, is the hidden reclamation of a gaze that is typically repressive. The idea of control of the gaze is very, very important within stripping. A lot of men think that they have entire control of the gaze, and I say men in a very reductive way. I'm aware that a variety of strip club customers do exist, but within these films, these men are convinced that they are in control the entire time. They're not buying just the gaze, but they're controlling the strippers with their gaze. When Davis can no longer control Jessie with his gaze and his opinion, it switches to him engaging in a masochistic relationship with her. His encounter ending of "I'm gonna watch" shows that Davis is a representative of men with a savior complex who claim to free women from the masochistic torture of sex work, and realistically provide no actual exit strategy or ways to make their life better. This is a very, very common thought in just general sex work politics at the moment. A lot of people are trying to get women out of being exploited by offering them jobs which they cannot work for whatever reason or are much lower paid, rather than increasing the workers' rights and better work conditions. Davis believes that he's still controlling Jessie by watching. A joke that we can recognise highlights the hypocrisy of male saviours to sex workers. So, in conclusion for this, a lot of the times sex workers in films are seen as damsels in distress. A lot of times they're only seen as women as well, which is not really true to the stripping sphere at the moment. I can only speak within knowledge of the UK strip scene, but the control over the gaze is very, very important. It's essentially how stripping functions. You pay for time. You don't pay for a person's body, because the worker still leaves with their body at the end of the night. You pay for a allotted amount of time. You pay for a performance. It's essentially the same as going to see a film in cinema. You don't leave with the entire film with you. However, when this concept is put into horror, this idea of controlling a gaze, this horror and the actual scare factor and the things that upset and terrify people are the assumed lack of control of the gaze for the women. Big Tit Zombie is generally a quite bad representation of strippers, because in the whole thing, men have control the entire time. There is no instance of female control of the gaze. There is no financial benefit for them being there. They are essentially blank figures to just be messed about with and get naked. It's very gratuitous, the nudity in both of these films. Of course, it was going to be gratuitous. It's called Zombie Strippers. There needs to be some appeal to draw people into these films. But within Zombie Strippers, the exploitation of women and strippers is so much more prevalent. The reversal of the gaze is really, really shown. At the end of this film, the women and the strippers kill the club owner. They kill the club owner with a face dance. He exploited them by enforcing this face dance. They killed him with it. It is this reclamation of the power in a gaze, the power of strippers in this relationship, which makes that film so phenomenal in terms of sex workers and how they actually function in real life. So yeah, a lot of the time films just don't get it right, especially given the really, really tense political climate about sex work right now. It's more important than ever to actually think critically about the sex workers we're seeing in media. So a lot of times, so I'd recommend these organisations to just actually get more information on sex work in the UK if you're interested. At the moment, it's a very, very tense time because a lot of councils are introducing things like nil cap rules in which they want to ban all strip clubs because of the poor exploited women. I say very sincerely, of course. And they don't see that this control over the gaze is what makes it powerful. In a world where a lot of times people who are female or female identifying are consistently controlled with gaze their entire lives, not only is sex work empowering in the fact that it is a reversal of that, it is a way to essentially profit and explore more power through an oppressive system. So yeah.